Hello and welcome to the ID Talks, to our audience here on Zoom and also to our audience on the Facebook page of Salto Inclusion and Diversity Resource Center. My name is Anna. I am the facilitator of ID Talks. And this fall, the ID Talks is traveling around Europe in our quest to collect inspiration, tips and tricks from youth workers who implement European projects through Erasmus Youth and European Solidarity Corps. These ID Talks are brought to you by Salto Inclusion and Diversity Resource Center, and we have a big part of our team here, Maria from the Resource Center, the other Maria that is responsible for social media, and Olaja, who is taking graphic notes from today's talk. This fall series that we call ID Travels is done in the framework of Strategic Partnership for Inclusion. And we are trying to bring to light our partners, different practitioners, from practice to research, to see what are some inclusion environments, inclusive practices, programs, partnerships that are prerequisites for quality projects that are inclusive and diversity sensitive. Today, I think for me is an extra special ID talk because one of my very dear colleagues is our guest, Gisele, and the ID talks today is about inclusive programs, the European youth programs. To conclude the autumn series, and this is the final fifth talk of the season, we are going to connect the dots and draw some conclusions, how inclusive really are the Erasmus Plus youth programs and the European Solidarity Corps, how well have we been doing since the launch of this generation of programs and since the launch of the Inclusion and Diversity Strategy. And today's ID Talks is going to heavily depend on or reveal the results of a study and that was done by Gisele in the beginning of this year, end of last year, on the first half of the period of program. So on the program period of 21-23. And a study that is called Making EU Youth Programs More Inclusive. Gisele, apart from being a very good friend and a very, very dear colleague, is a youth worker, youth work trainer, a consultant with over 30 years experience in international youth work from all different perspectives of a volunteer to European institution representative, who is also now more dwelling into her profession as a systemic coach and a Gestalt therapist, who has lived throughout different countries in Europe. And I think it's better I pass you the floor, Gisele, and you can tell us more about you. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Anna, dear friend indeed, and dear colleagues, certainly, but also the rest of the team here. I think I can associate to that. Thanks for the nice introduction. I'm really glad to be here. Indeed, I've been in the field for probably around 30 years now, and I had the amazing luck to endorse different roles, youth workers, trainers, sending people in work and voluntary projects, working for the Commission, the Council of Europe, Salto Training and Cooperation, and many other roles. And this allowed me really, I think, to have a kind of broader overview, not the broadest, definitely, and learning is always an ongoing journey, but it really gave me a broader overview of the field. What I would not say about me today anymore is that I'm a youth worker. I think fairly I have to leave, especially thinking to the other contributors of the ID Talks. They are doing youth work. I was doing youth work. I'm now talking about youth work, researching about youth work, consulting about youth work, but I wouldn't dare to say that I'm a youth worker anymore. I'm now actually connecting from a meeting of a project called Europe Goes Local. Maybe some of you know, where, yes, you do have youth workers who are doing local youth work and local youth work development. So kudos to them, but I'll be a bit more humble in that respect. So yes, I've been in the field for a while. Inclusion was actually my very, 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 very first project ever. It was a work camp on inclusion and social justice, an itinerant work camp long time ago in Belgium with, of course, an international group. And that's the moment where I got in touch with inclusion. I think since then, I would also not pretend to be an expert. There are people who have much more expertise than me, but that's a topic that is very dear to me. So I was really happy when Salto Inclusion and Diversity offered me the possibility to work on this research. So that's what I'm going to present today. It's a research, so it's going to be rather one-way communication, one-way information. I apologize for that in advance. There might be moments where I will ask for your opinion and for your thoughts, but nevertheless, it's a presentation of the study. So it's not the same level of inspiration, perhaps, as the previous stories you've heard, but hopefully you will find that interesting. Maybe before I start sharing my screen for the PowerPoint, I would like to ask those who are here, I cannot follow on Facebook, but if you can just use a reaction to tell me if you have been involved in mobility under the Erasmus program. All right, same question, but for the European Solidarity Corps. So yeah, the first question perhaps is why do inclusion and diversity matter? I woke up this morning like probably many of you, or I don't know, but I assume many of you hearing the news about the elections in the United States. I will not pretend here to assume we all share the same political views, but I did remember a documentary I saw about Trump. I think it's from a speech of some months ago, where he said that part of the problems of the US today is the focus on inclusion and equity. And this kind of was stuck in my head, and I was really wondering, okay, that's part of a context of a discourse, but I was really wondering, okay, why do we need to really invest energy and everything we can in dealing with inclusion and diversity and everything that is connected to that? And I think of course, it's about making a world where everybody has a place, everybody has a say, everybody has a role to play, no matter what. But I think it's also a sign of hope that in these societies, in our societies, there is a space to improve always, again and again and again. So for me, that's my personal view, but I think that's why it matters. It's that we cannot live in a world where people are left behind or left aside. And our world is not perfect, we are not perfect, and that's the scope, I think, for improvement. So for me, the hope is really a big dimension as well of inclusion and diversity. When it comes to the research, what was done is that during July and October 23, we had a desk research. So we looked at different activities, different reports, different publications that would tackle inclusion and diversity. And a bit parallel to that, we also started to have some focus groups and interviews with some experts, some trainers, also some national agencies representative. Anna is one of the person we also interviewed. We tried to make sure that we have experts also from different regions. So it was not a big group, but nevertheless, we tried to have as much representativity as possible. So during September and November, we had this focus group and interviews. And this was all turned into a research report, which maybe some of you have read already. It's accessible on the Salto Inclusion and Diversity webpage, which really collect the essence of what was done. Who was involved? Well, you can see there 20 staff from 18 national agencies, of course, the staff of inclusion and diversity, of Salto Inclusion and Diversity, beneficiaries, trainers, experts, and even a couple of newcomers, meaning two young persons who are really, really new in the program. They didn't even do a mobility yet. but they were in an event where the strategic partnership on inclusion was having this harvesting conference space. So we also had a chat with them to also see their perspectives and their needs. Why did we do that? That research is because in the process of the European programs, the European youth programs, there is at the end of a certain period, but also in the middle of the program period, evaluations that are being carried to just basically check how are the programs doing. In the past one, we noticed that, of course, inclusion and diversity was tackled like any other priorities in the programs, but not to the level that would be sufficient to really look at what are the changes that are needed. So what Salto Inclusion and Diversity decided to do is to take the opportunity of the midterm evaluation of the current Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Core programs to really give space and time to see, okay, how inclusive are the programs? They have inclusion and diversity as a priority. Obviously, there are mechanisms that are in place to support inclusive projects, but nevertheless, let's have a look. How are the programs doing? And that was the main idea behind the research, and of course to use the outcomes as possible contribution to the overall midterm evaluation process. As far as possible, of course. So that was a bit the idea. And the context when this was done was therefore this midterm evaluation, but we also used the opportunity of events and other meetings that provided spaces for contributions to this research, such as this harvesting conference that I was mentioning that took place under the Strategic Partnership on Inclusion project that was in September 23. The Salto Inclusion and Diversity and the strategy has a steering group composed of a number of stakeholders, European Commission, national agencies. They do meet twice a year. So there was a meeting in October 23 where we also presented the first insights, but also collected further thoughts. ID kitchens and EU inclusion or Discover EU inclusion roundtable. So these are spaces that were tackling issues that we explored in the research and where we took the opportunity to present the first insights and sense a little bit, okay, how does that resonate to a number of stakeholders as well, at least. So that was more about the context of the research. Perhaps some core concepts you might be familiar with several of them, but nevertheless, we thought that it might also be good to underline a little bit what we are talking about. And these are not like the only definition you can find about those concepts, but probably the ones that do I would say meet a general consensus about what is tackled, for instance, by diversity or behind diversity. So we talk about geography, or geographical diversity, sex, age, personality or personalities even, talents, qualification, ethnicity, beliefs, sexual orientation, lifestyles, education, gender, abilities, disabilities, different abilities, you name it, and of course, much more. The message there is that we are people made of many, many, many different dimensions, and this is us. We are diverse people, no matter what we think. We cannot just be made of one thing. So we embed diversity. And the idea here is, of course, to celebrate and recognize that diversity. Then you have marginalization, which can be understood as one of the mechanisms of exclusion, as opposed to inclusion, obviously. But that cannot be taken in an isolated manner. Marginalization goes very often with discrimination. The moment you start excluding someone, you discriminate it, you create barriers to participation, barriers to inclusion. So that goes with stereotypes, with oppressions, with a set of norms, bias, and so on and so on and so on. So those concepts are important to have in mind when we talk about inclusion and diversity. Inclusion means to embrace everyone, no matter what they have, what they are, in terms of diversity. So if you go back to the slide before, it's about belonging. So in systemic terms, since Anna mentioned the systemic work that I also do, we say that inclusion is not always systemic, but systemic is always inclusive, in the sense of a system. Youth work is a system, the youth field is a system, your organizations is a system. To function well, it needs to be inclusive. It cannot leave anyone aside. It's also, as I said, really about belonging. And equity is different from inclusion in the sense that it's not just about embracing everyone, but recognizing that not everyone is starting from the very same place. So it's about being fair, it's about justice, it's about acknowledging the starting point and creating the conditions that everyone can actually then embark on the same journey. Again, those are just a few concepts, a few words, but they are important because they were very present in the research that we did. Especially equity came very often as one of the dimensions to work towards, to work even more towards. So yeah, I thought it was good to have a look at that. And that would be the first question to you. If you think about those terms, so diversity, marginalization, exclusion, and the terms that I was mentioning, what do they mean to you in the context of the work that you do? So I'm not sure if you are into local youth work or more European youth work or both, but when it comes to inclusive projects. And I would be very happy if you could write a little bit in the chat the key words about what they evoke, what's resonate in you when you hear those terms. And
but here from Soisik, necessity, but obstacles, barriers, and impediment. And I also put my comment if it is. To me, inclusion is about leaving no young person behind. Annie here is writing that it's an ability to change the environment to the place where everyone is included. Provide opportunity for all and accessibility. Embracing differences.
Obviously, accessibility when it comes to mobilities, you also mentioned barriers, are elements that you will see in the research were mentioned tremendously often. Yeah, that's what I'm actually going to present now. Perhaps a little bit of data and a little bit of warning also about those data. We talk about data that have been collected from a period until the beginning of 23. So this data is somehow already outdated. It's the data that we had at the time we started the research about the amount of participants in the different programs, in the different projects. So for the period 2014, 2020, the number of projects approved was representing 27% to 34%, which is already quite an enormous amount. And the participants of all projects altogether, so that means also the other sectors, not only youth, represented 22 to 25%, which is a quarter. So that's also quite a lot. And 40% of those participants were so-called young people with fewer opportunities, which brings basically, which sheds light really on the importance of inclusion and diversity, opportunities, mechanisms, and support for the projects and for the youth projects in particular, because the number shows that indeed young people with few opportunities do take actively part in the programs. So if you take the budget proportion of the two programs for that period, dedicated to those projects, we go around 13%, which is not nothing. And when it comes to the period 21-23, you can see that the projects that focused on inclusion and diversity under the European Solidarity Corps represented 56%, a little bit than 56%. So more than half of the projects were looking at inclusion and diversity or had a dimension of inclusion and diversity. And in Erasmus plus Youth, so we don't talk about the other sectors in the program, but just the youth one, we reach a level of around 24% of projects that are ID or inclusion and diversity focused or related. If you put the two together, we have an average of 33%, which means that 1/3 of the projects, of youth projects under those two programs, represent inclusive projects. So that's something that I think the field could be extremely proud of. And that's also an argument in a way to request even more focused from the program on the issues of inclusion and diversity, and not just issues, but simply procedures, dimension, and opportunities in the program, in both programs. You can also see that in the Solidarity Core, it's more. You will understand that through the next slides, that indeed there is at least an understanding that the European Solidarity Corps, almost by nature, has a tendency to have a bigger inclusion focus than Erasmus Plus. There's nothing bad or wrong. It's really more connected to the nature of the program itself. So the main insights that we got during the research will be, as I will show in a moment, but I would like now to ask you for a little poll. So I will ask Maria or Anna to ask your opinion about the challenges in creative inclusive programs. So in your opinion, what is the primary challenge in creative inclusive program? Yeah, so some people are starting to answer your budgets, then you have complexity of procedures, outreach, information, or something else.
Yeah, majority of answers are about budget, so that the biggest impediment is budget. Then half of our audience thinks so, and some people, more people, think that this is the complexity of procedures, and there we also have an answer about outreach. And there is surprisingly nobody that is given the answer of information.
The question of not having anything about information is in fact not so surprising. I can already say before I go to the main insights that this, for instance, would be a comment that we get a lot from the newcomers, that for them to find where to find information is actually the very first step that can be complicated for some. But the majority of the people that we used as contributors for the research were people who already had access to information, who know exactly where to find information, or can support their beneficiaries or their youngsters about where to find information. So probably that dimension was less present. But for newcomers, this would come out, for instance. So I think it was good to underline that. All right, so sorry for that. Yeah, when it comes to the main insights, this is really a summary. I'm going to detail that more in the next slides. Is the beneficiary organizations, but also the national agencies, acknowledge that there have been a lot of improvement. So it's not like nothing has happened. Thanks to the focus, thanks to having inclusion and diversity as a priority, thanks to the work of Salto Inclusion and Diversity, NA's efforts and engagement, and so on, there was really a move. So there are improvements that have been put in place, which are worth mentioning, and I will mention them afterwards. Most, or at least many national agencies have a national inclusion and diversity strategy, thanks to the European and program-related inclusion and diversity strategy. There are new profiles of applicants, so we don't have anymore bear with me for the generalization, but the standard youth workers. We now have social workers coming in, educators coming in. So this is a sign also that there are new groups interested to work with inclusion and diversity. Of course, it also brings complexity in a way, but nevertheless, it's worth underlining that. So yes, things are moving, but much more needs to be done. And this is probably a never-ending story, because as long as we keep on evolving, issues are becoming also more either apparent or are changing as the society is changing. So there is always work to be done. The programs do foster inclusion and diversity in European youth work. And as I was saying, the European Solidarity Corps has even a stronger impact, because it really also looks at the community level. It doesn't mean that Erasmus Plus doesn't do that. And it might also be that in the future, Erasmus Plus will do that more, because there are more and more talks about the importance to come back to the local level, to the community level. But the Solidarity Corps does that almost by nature. So there is a stronger impact there. And then I think one big voice we heard, and we saw that now in the poll that we had, of course, budget-wise and complexity, things need to change. One size does not fit all, so we need to have more tailored mechanisms for the different groups we deal with, because inclusion and diversity means also diversity in the groups we are working with. It's not just like one profile and one label. So if I now take the time to look a little bit at the stakeholders and newcomers perspective, but to be honest, it has newcomers in the title, but it's mostly stakeholders in the sense of those who are already active in the programs. We can say that what came out is that was actually mentioned a lot. It's the importance to have a very sensitive relation or a very sensitive approach to the relation between diversity and inclusion. So I introduced these core terms at the beginning for a reason. A lot of stakeholders, a lot of beneficiaries really question the nature of diversity and inclusion within the programs. They underline the importance to really stick, or not stick, but keep in mind the values of diversity and the function of inclusion. So you had some beneficiaries who were questioning, okay, is inclusion a name in itself, or is inclusion a process? And the same goes with the other core dimensions that I was mentioning. So it's a means, but it's an end at the same time. There are a set of values behind those terms. So it's always a little delicate dance between diversity and inclusion, but also about what we decide to focus on in the end of the day. So there were a lot of calls for, we do need to really take an active role in addressing the barriers, in addressing exclusion, until we can say, yes, we are now taking the parts towards more inclusive programs, inclusive projects, and in the end of the road, hopefully inclusive societies. So there were a lot of philosophical and value-based exchanges with the stakeholders. Naturally, the bureaucratic complexities were underlined. Actually, this is common to almost everyone we spoke to, and the European Commission recognizes that as well. So we talk about visa issues, budget limitations, and especially a need for bigger support to organizations. I will mention also afterwards that yes, there have been improvement also in terms of budget, but then nevertheless, the whole process remains extremely complex for inclusive projects with inclusive budgets, but especially for smaller organizations. The efforts there proportionally are much bigger to make than for bigger organizations who are more used to deal with the implementation and the development of inclusive projects. The first bullet point and the second bullet points also lead to the feeling of a certain inconsistency between inclusive intentions. The European youth programs have to be inclusive. This is part of one, I mean, it's one of the priorities of the program. The programs are articulated around that as well. But in reality, what is put in place to support this inclusive dimension is not yet strong enough. So there is a bit of inconsistency or discrepancy between the political dimension of the programs and this conscious choice to put the focus on inclusion and diversity, but at the same time, the means that are not yet sufficient to reach to reach the goal, to reach the intentions. What they also said is that the external pressures in societies, the social or societal context, do influence the effectiveness of inclusion and diversity. You cannot just look at inclusion and diversity projects in a nutshell, in an isolated manner, in a vacuum. Everything that is happening around that is influencing how much the programs can be effective and how much the projects can be effective. So you can look at the demographic issues, you can look at the conflicts that are happening, you can look at the discrepancy between urban and rural youth work. You can look at all these dimensions that constantly impact and affect the field of youth work at large, but also how inclusive projects are being shaped and are being implemented, and of course supported by the programs. There is a sense or feeling that the European Commission is a big machine, so here we don't address people in particular, but the mechanism behind the implementation of the program still favor more quantity over quality. We need numbers. We need to show that we have X number of projects that tackle inclusion and diversity. A little bit what I did when we started this webinar, by showing you data that would actually demonstrate, yes, it's working, it's growing. There is a focus on inclusion and diversity, but so to prioritize that over quality. This means for organizations who want to have inclusive projects, an additional pressure, and really the question, are we looking for targets or are we looking for fostering inclusivity? Inclusive projects take time, they require money, adequate budgets, they are not cheap. So it's really the question, maybe we have less projects but more quality in terms of inclusive projects, or we have more inclusion projects, but with perhaps a lesser quality. Quality here is a term that can be, I understand, perhaps misunderstood, but we really talk about projects that have enough conditions to be called inclusive projects. Nevertheless, as I said, the stakeholders also underline the efforts that have been made. You now have supportive lump sums, you have accreditation system that allow organizations to have over a number of years a kind of work plan that can allow more flexibility in developing inclusive projects. You have inclusion supports grants that are connected to these lump sums. Exceptional costs can be covered. You have quality labels in the Solidarity Core that also guarantee somehow quality inclusive projects, and national agencies, no matter what we think, try to be as flexible as possible to guarantee the biggest support possible to organizations who wish to develop inclusive projects or projects tackling inclusion and diversity. So this has been acknowledged. This is really appreciated and valued. It's not enough, but it's worth mentioning at least. So if you think of what I've said, but if you also think of this in balance or imbalance of a quality over quantity in inclusion projects, what do you think would help to achieve this balance, in your opinion, from your perspective, with your experience? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. What you say is also useful for us to see or to read, because we might not hear it. So quality over quantity or quantity over quality, what do you think we need to have to achieve at least a balance, if not more quality than quantity?
Soazik here from France is writing that perhaps give more value to the quality of projects, share the project stories, change the need of numbers for potential stories, real life examples.
I don't say anything. I will comment on that after, but thank you very much.
Maybe I share another one here from the chat, and he is writing that experienced trainers, project writers who know how to take some balance between quantity and quality and how to make projects really qualified with friendly, good environment. So also experience of the team and people who know how to put this inclusion vocabulary in the project form. And indeed, there are probably cases when people who actually do very good projects are not very good writers of projects. Yes, for quality versus quantity would require a suitable number of specialists involved in one project. So also how many people need to give support per project to really make it quality. That's another idea from Sorina. Thank you very much for writing your comments in the chat.
Yes, thank you indeed very much for that. Perhaps starting with the question of having experienced trainers or project writers that can really support writing a projects that convey, I don't want to use properly because that's a value judgment, but or judgmental work, but that really can convey the inclusive nature of the project is important. Here we don't talk so much about necessarily the quality of the projects at the level of the application, but also at the level of implementation. But it's nevertheless, it can be helpful to have guidance and support from people who can accompany the writing process of a project. It really reminds me also of exchanges we had with colleagues doing assessment for on behalf of one national agency long time ago, where we had really this debate like, what do you do if you are assessing an application that you can just see that it's not properly written, it's hard to read, but you can sense behind the enthusiasm, you can sense behind that these are really I think in that case it was youth exchanges, but you can really see that the young people took part in writing the application and so on. So what do you decide to go for there? Oh, the European dimension is not very well described, but okay, is that the most important, or is feeling really that we are talking there about a project that is really involving the young people from the start? Okay, it was not necessarily inclusive, so perhaps the example is not exactly fitting, but it's just to say the way you read a project at the time of the application, at the time of the assessment, of course, influences you no matter what. I mean, you can say that you try to be as open as possible, but it does play a role. So to have some guidance, I'm not saying that you have to give the whole process away, but to have some guidance can definitely be helpful, and a learning process too. Values of projects and shed the light on that, and the stories. Yes. I think we keep on being amazed no matter the context. It can be in a conference, it can be in a seminar, it can be in a youth exchange, in a youth worker mobility. How much personal stories show the value of projects that give space for people to feel that they belong, that they have a role to play, and also how these projects are very often a life-changing experience when it's your very first participation. So personal stories are probably one of the best way to ever convey that the project inclusion works. And that shows a lot about the quality indeed. So thank you very much to post that. And then, yeah, having specialists, experts involved in the project itself or in the event itself ensures quality. It ensures also the possibility of the more you have, the more diversity you can also have in your group. And that's exactly where the challenge is, because that means more cost. So you need higher budget. National agencies need to allocate more funding. And that's where the balance between quality and quantity is put into question. So thank you very much for raising that. It's a very concrete example of how to reach quality, but it also exemplifies very well the challenge of budgets for inclusive projects. And this is actually what I want to, sorry?
In the meantime, we got one more very interesting comment maybe you want to hear before we move forward.
Sure.
To involve and encourage more workers, trainers that face barriers themselves.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a very interesting comment here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna, for jumping in. Yes, and actually we heard that a lot in the research as well. Actually, it's not mentioned in my overview here, and I apologize for that. Yes, those running projects should also have not only experience with working with diverse group and inclusion, I would say groups, but also themselves come from, I don't want to use the word category, but at least from an area that is very much in touch with whatever is being the topic of the project. So we talk about trainers, facilitators, youth leaders with different abilities, or that come from rural areas or face a number of barriers and so on. So it's about having representativity also in those who are developing the program, developing the projects and implementing the projects. We also heard that in terms of communication and promotion, that we also need to have those people visible in posters, leaflets, whatever visual or audio material that we have. These groups also need to be represented, and not as just one element among another happy few, but really reflecting as much as possible the reality and the societies. I hope this is what was meant by the comment. I don't know if it was on Facebook or on Zoom, but if you can just confirm that this was in line with what I just said now, I'd be happy.
So Zach is giving a sign that it is.
Okay, thanks a lot. But thanks for raising that. Indeed, I think it's really, really important. Actually, it's also, just to say one more thing about that, it's also important when it comes to not only representativity and understanding, but it's also a question of empathy. So to really also be able to connect at another level, at a resonance level, also with the participants that you have in your project. So definitely, thank you for raising that. So when it comes to national agencies, because obviously they also have their opinion and they had a lot to say in this process, we see that in terms of success is that, as I said at the beginning, many national agencies have a national inclusion and diversity strategy. Sometimes it's a real strategy, sometimes it's more or it's closer to an operational work plan. But nevertheless, there is something at national level that helps them to have a direction to follow when they support inclusion and diversity through the projects that they grant or the opportunities that they design as well. They see as a success the increased support for organizations, as I was mentioning. There's and it's also there in the point on enhanced accessibility. There are more lump sums, there are easier processes. I think Ellie and Hannah were talking about that in the very first ID talks on inclusive administration. So there are many more mechanisms that are put in place to support organizations, and they see as a success that, as I was saying also at the beginning, that there are new profiles of applicants coming. It also means that for national agencies, it is sometimes harder to reach out to those profiles, but they can establish partnerships with structures or with networks that are closer to this new profile, like I was mentioning, educators or social workers. So it's also a way to create new relations and have organizations that can say, okay, it might be hard for you to reach out to those people, but we do work with them, so let's work together towards bringing them in the program. So these are some of the successes mentioned by the national agencies. The financial constraints are part of the challenges. As I said, having inclusive projects cost a lot of money. You have some national agencies who have really small budgets and they have to cover many more types of projects than inclusive projects. So for them, it's a challenge. It's really a question of how do I make choices to make sure that I support inclusion and diversity, but at the same time that I don't penalize other projects. As I said, there are some difficulties in reaching out to new organizations and provide continuous support. So that remains a challenge in spite of the successes connected to that. They also have the perception that, so I was saying that it's also a perception that is shared by national agency that at some, to a certain extent, they need to provide numbers and quantity over quality. They understand why it's like that, because quantity and whatever we think, showing numbers also gives argument to the field of youth work, but also to the Commission and the Director General on Education and Culture to say, see, we reached that many numbers of people through that many numbers of projects. So numbers do have a certain weight and can be used as an argument to claim for more budget, but at the same time, as I said before, and as you said as well when you shared your reflection, quality is important. So there is always this dilemma of, okay, we need to have more quantity, but that has an impact on quality. So this is one of the challenge, and the last one is connected to the budget, to have a better budget allocation, simplified procedure, easier forms for reporting, for applying, for inclusion projects, and especially for small organizations, but also have more qualitative assessment possibilities so that they can really also showcase that yes, it works. So it's really this message that that needs to be better supported by the national agencies. So when it comes to the general recommendations, before I share them, I would be happy, again, you can voice it or you can write it. I would be happy to hear, in your opinion, what do you think would be necessary in terms of support to make the programs more accessible to new or to small organizations?
I think while some people are still typing, I can paraphrase. There was a question, but I think very much in line with your question.
Mm-hmm.
This is the need of writing projects properly. And Annie was asking how to write projects properly that our project include or cover the inclusion and diversity strategy on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the project really includes some kind of quality indicators, or yeah, this is maybe one need, not only a question. Another one that just came in is maybe having a network of more experienced partners and experts that can be contacted. For example, experts regarding accessibility or someone from LGBT community. Again, help shaping the proposal comes in. Offer more trainings to these organizations. Mentoring is another one that is just in from our audience here in Zoom. One more answer came in: proper budget from national agencies, free and accessible online or face-to-face training courses which help to explore the opportunities.
I will walk you through the recommendations that came out of the research, but then I will comment on some of the elements that you shared, because you will see that there are some relations as well with what came out. So, of course, as I listed the challenge, naturally the recommendation go in line with that. So make it easier, small flexible grants, simplified forms, higher budget for the Solidarity Core program, because you might not know, but for a while the budget of that program has not increased while the number of projects, and especially inclusion projects, as you saw, has. So it's really about the person who said proper budget for national agencies. That also means indeed to have higher budget for the programs and for inclusion projects. Quality matters. You've heard that. So we need to have a greater emphasis on inclusive initiatives instead of the number of young people with few opportunities. And by the way, there's one thing that I didn't say, but the question of the label, and that will come also a little bit later towards the last slides, the question of labeling young people with few opportunities was also mentioned by some beneficiaries who say we need to stop using this label. It's discriminative by nature, while others said, yes, but unfortunately, that's the only way to really attract the attention on a certain group of young people. So again, we are in a delicate dance between the need for labels, but also what they convey for the groups that are concerned by that. So there's no answer to this dilemma. But I thought that it's important also to underline that this was really a real concern by some organizations. You even have some organizations who refuse to tick the box young people with the opportunities when they apply for grants because they do not want to have to explain the situations of their participants. So yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning that. Structural changes versus individual integration. So it's again about making sure that we emphasize or that we put emphasis on developing inclusive, diversity-sensitive structures that remove barriers from the beginning. So it's not about addressing the problems at the end of the road, but making sure that the barriers are removed from the beginning so that the road can be inclusive as such. So this was also mentioned a lot. Other recommendations tackled understanding and addressing the barriers to inclusion. So we need to know more and more and more about what is really preventing or hindering inclusive projects or inclusive or participation. So it's really about the accessibility to the program, the support mechanism, the effort and resources. And there, for instance, you would possibly tackle trainings and mentoring. So under the European Solidarity Corps, you have a lot of initiatives by the Salto European Solidarity Corps, but also by organizations in mentoring also for inclusion projects and training initiatives in general. NAs are developing training or learning initiatives. The Saltos are developing training and learning initiatives, of course, organizations as well, and national agencies. So it's really about increasing the offers and the spaces for capacity building for inclusive projects, for inclusion and diversity dimensions in the projects that we do. So definitely training is important, but mentoring as well. You even have some national agencies who have kind of mini coaching systems. So that's also connected to writing projects. Application is not only about delegating that to someone who knows how to do it, but really have coaching of organizations on how to not only write their applications better or clearer, but also really completely integrate the values and the ideas behind inclusive projects. Sometimes the intentions are very great. We want to have an inclusive project, but what does that really mean is not always clear. So some agencies have these coaching processes. It cannot be made on a large scale because, again, that means, first of all, an extra step, but also extra funding, but it's happening. So these are the kind of resources that can support understanding the barriers, but also addressing them through the development of inclusive projects. To have more specific inclusion budgets, so as someone said again, yes, it's revised NA budgets for or dedicated to inclusion, and that means also increase them to have even more adjustments of the lump sums and maximum grants that currently exist for organizations. Those could be extended, could be increased. And here is the label dimension, so a more sensitive approach to the label. Let's be very clear about what we want to say when we use the label and what we want to say when we decide not to use the label. So that's important as well. And finally, it's about having also a better monitoring and evaluation tools organized or offered by the European Commission. So here we talk about the tools that are destined to national agencies and to the Saltos. At the moment, they are not good enough to really be able to showcase not only numbers, so not only quantity, but also quality of inclusion and diversity projects related in the programs. There will be a slide on Discover EU Inclusion, so I will jump that one. And then finally, it's also about having more cooperation with neighboring partner countries, so the regions around Europe or the European Union even, which has been mentioned and seen as sine qua non, really important. If we talk about inclusion, we cannot talk about inclusion without talking about cooperation with our neighbors. And there are two slides about Discover EU and the neighboring regions. So here is the one about Discover EU. We've heard through the focus group, the interviews, but also through one meeting that was really dedicated to that Discover EU inclusion has a few problem inherent to the way it's called, but also to the way it's designed, or I should say it was designed. So the fact that application procedure were still complex, that you had age limit restriction, which is 18 or which was 18 years old, that group travel was not really possible. All this made it contradicting with the intention of Discover EU inclusion. So this was mentioned a lot. If you really want to have Discover EU inclusion, this needs to be addressed, this needs to be changed. You cannot have the age limit at 18 because we talk about groups where 18 years old is way still too low for allowing people to embark on such a journey. The same goes with group travel logistic. Before the booking of the train itself was complicated and impeding really a easy group travel process. So that has been addressed. And then the name of Discover EU Inclusion as such was perceived and is still perceived by some as potentially stigmatizing, because the whole idea of inclusion and diversity is to open up and have groups where you can have diversity, which means inclusion and non-inclusion, where you can have different type of groups all together learning from each other. If you have a Discover EU inclusion, when you only have groups that are understood behind this label of young people with few opportunities, the level of exchange with other groups is potentially less, even if in the young people with few opportunities, you have in itself or behind this denomination a huge diversity as well. But nevertheless, it's about, okay, we have again something that puts them together in one action and one program, while the rest, and I use brackets, I don't know if you see, but is having access to other actions or to other type of projects. So this was addressed. And with by guess what is that sometimes requests and pleas for change are heard by the European Commission. So the age limit has been increased to 21. Maria, you jump in if I'm saying something wrong, but I think it's 21 now. The travel, or it will be implemented, but it has been decided. The travel logistic as well has been adjusted, that it's easier to book group tickets and to adjust them. So some of the requirements or the recommendations rather than requirements have been heard and have been implemented. Of course, there are limitations. Limitations are not only in the hands of the people who want to change or hear the request for changes, but also simply in the reglementation and regulations of the programs, which are heavier processes to address. But just to say that at least for those who have the feeling that we ask, and it doesn't help, it's never changing, it's not completely true. Sometimes what we ask is being heard and it's being understood. And probably because it's being understood, it's being acted upon. And I think it's really the last point now, if I'm not mistaken. It's about what I was saying, the cooperation with neighboring regions. If we zoom out of the programs and even of the field of youth work, we live in a world now where we cannot look at our realities only from our little regional, national, local, European, whatever perspective. We need to open up and look at what's happening around. We cannot have inclusive youth work if we don't take into account that at our borders, you have wars happening, that you have groups suffering from a situation which youth work cannot be solved, but which youth work is impacted by. So if we also talk about interculturality, if we talk about intercultural communication, sensitivity, if we talk about gender sensitivity, if we talk about diversity, remember that slide at the beginning, we are human beings made of so many different dimensions. we have to also comprehend that we have neighbors, we have regions that have a direct impact on the work we do, and which we also impact through the work we do. By we, I mean also in the European Union, because some of these regions are part of Europe. Europe as a continent. So it's really important to take this into account. It's almost their political message, even though at the level of programs, and not only the youth programs, you tend to see that there is more and more concentration on the EU and on Europe. And to push a bit forward or a bit away, perhaps the other regions. I'm not talking only about Erasmus Plus and Solidarity Corps here, while the opposite should actually happen if we want to be true to what we mean by cooperation and by living together in inclusive societies. The regional Salto resource centers are very active in dealing with inclusion and diversity, so it's also worth acknowledging that the work they do. And of course, the idea here is also to encourage even more partnerships, to have really proper intercultural exchanges with other countries, with other regions, and those across the borders of the European Union. So I think that's a bit of the last message that I could share from the research, from the different interactions we had with stakeholders, with national agencies, so beneficiary organization, and as I said, expert trainers. There would be much more to say about the research. I'm speaking now for almost an hour, or we have been together for almost an hour. So the invitation is to read the research. Like all the research, very soon is probably going to be outdated, which is a good sign. It means that things are moving. But there will be further development connected to the research. Before I give the floor to Maria to speak about, or to say a few words about the here and now, I want to quote Ellie, who was sharing her experience in the idtalks on inclusive administration. And she said that there are questions that she constantly have in mind when she starts a project. It's, how did we do it until now? Who is still missing? What can we change in administration and implementation? So of course that was the focus of the webinar, but you could also say, what can we change in order to have those who are missing in? I found it absolutely wonderful that she voices how much each time you need to question yourself or as an organization, are we doing this in the right way? Are we doing this for the right purpose? So it's always to question, no matter what, at the moment you write an application or you seek for support to write an application, you start implementing your project, you start talking about it, you start working with the participants, or you start as a participant a journey in an inclusion or inclusive project. It's really always questioning, what are we doing this for? How did we do it until now? What needs to be changed so that we can do it better and have more people in? So I wanted to mention that, because I really appreciated that message from Ellie. So yeah, I'll give the floor to Maria, and I will close at least my part of the webinar here. When it comes to the input, at least, what I want to say is this: I think you belong, and if you don't belong, we have to make it possible that you belong. I think today more than any other day, this is a very important message to voice. I think in loud and clear. So I will stop sharing my screen and give the floor back to Maria and then to Anna.
Thank you, Gisele. So what now? We will continue questioning and we will be asked to provide some answers, because as you know, this exercise has been done in order to contribute to midterm evaluation of the programs, because actually we are now at the moment when we are starting to think of and to develop the new generations of the program, so after 27. So the process has started. By mid 25, there will be like a legal basis for the new programs. And then after that, till end of 27, we will all be working, or Commission mainly will be working on developing the guides and the calls and really giving the form to this legal basis, like how practically that's going to look like. But we will all be asked to contribute. This was our small Salt Inclusion and Diversity Resource Center contribution to the midterm evaluation, which was hopefully taken on board in a big exercise that Commission has been doing. And the full report, the Commission report on a midterm evaluation, will be launched in January, probably 2025. Once it's there, we will also share it through our social media channels so that you can also get even the bigger picture. This was just like a small puzzle. And then inclusion dimension in the midterm evaluation is one of the dimensions or like priorities that the Commission will be looking at. So thank you, Gisele. Give floor then to Anna, because I think there were a few questions as well.
Yes, we still have a few open questions that are in the chat. Before passing the floor to Soazik to voice the question, I have a written question that we haven't addressed yet from Sorina. It is the following one. How can we realize or understand that an inclusion project is successful? What are the criteria that make the difference between an average project and a successful one? I think there are probably no other questions that so far we haven't addressed in the chat. If something else is coming to your mind, we have about 10 minutes before the end of today's call. And Soazik, you have now the floor to maybe voice your question, and then Gisele, you could maybe address both questions at the same time. Please.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the floor. And thank you also for this research, Gisele. Is very, very interesting. It's like half a question, half a comment, but you say that the European Solidarity Corps has more inclusive project than Erasmus Plus. Do you know why? And do you think it's maybe because of the length of the project, like European Solidarity Corps are longer to plan, whereas Erasmus Plus, I am thinking, for example, in key mobility worker, like training course on Salto are shorter, so maybe it's more difficult to organize inclusive project. And also because of my personal experience, I don't want to talk too much, but I did a European voluntary service as a person with reduced mobility. But in overall, it was a great experience, and I still found very challenging sometimes to apply for training course. And I'm sorry because I think I already said before, but some said on the offer that it's accessible to people with disabilities, and then I realized that it's not, or I have to ask the organizer before, and then when the organizer replied to me, said we are not going to be able to host you, and by the way, I already submitted my application form, so it's quite frustrating. And also I was talking with a girl with disability. She has chronic fatigue, and she said that when it said it's accessible for people with disability, most of the training courses are really very long journeys. It can be difficult for her to attend, so sometimes the level of accessibility can comprehend lots of different things. And sorry, and I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So Azik, that's how you pronounce your name? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much I will start with your question, not because the one of Sorina is less relevant, but starting from the end. So about the European Solidarity Corps, what I've heard, so it's just one element, and don't take that as an answer to everything, but it's because of the nature of the Solidarity Corps and volunteering projects and the fact that it looks at support very often to community development. The organizations are hosting volunteers, short-term or long-term, or you have projects that are really looking at the local level and the community level. And in a way, this goes hand in hand with inclusion. It's easier to address. It's the impact might be more visible as well. So it's not only about the participant themselves, it's also about the impact of the project. Duration, okay, now it's my opinion. That's not really a data I can extract from the research, but of course, the longer you stay, the stronger the impact is on you as a volunteer. You've been an EVS volunteer, so probably you know that better than anyone. But you can also see on a long-term scale what's changed at the local level, especially when you have groups of volunteers. I think organizations who host volunteer for a longer time can really say what effect they have on the community. But at the same time, I'm very much still in resonance with a lot of participants who took part in youth exchanges and who said this was the transformative experience in my life that I will never, ever forget. So the impact there, the really life-changing experience is very strong for many. That's the very first touch with other communities, with in other countries, very often other groups, other languages, other ways of living, other ways of thinking, other ways of working. So duration has an impact, that's for sure, but it's not the only element. I think it's really that the Solidarity Corps by nature, by just the fact that it has solidarity also in its name, I think convey a certain value-based approach that is reflected in the projects. When it comes to the challenges that you describe for yourself or for your friend that has the chronic fatigue, there I would really recommend, if you haven't done that, but that's also valid for everybody else, listening to the previous ID talks on inclusive travel and inclusive projects, because you can sense there really what can help to reduce as much as possible the bad surprises, like, oops, I applied, but no, in fact, I cannot go because it's not adjusted for me. Or for organizations to realize, oops, we would like to have these groups or offer participation to that profile of participant, but we cannot because we think we cannot have extra money, and so on and so on. So I don't have a tailor answer to, actually, it was not really a question in that respect, but to what you commented upon. There is definitely a need for more support for organizations to really understand how to best comprehend and envision their projects from the very beginning. National agencies are very willing to help. So those who are afraid to reach out to national agencies to ask for guidance should not hesitate to do that, because if you heard the one again where Hannah was really mentioning, like, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this, you can do that. So it's not, of course, perfect, but there is a possibility to, from the beginning, make sure that the experience you have are kept to the minimum. And hopefully that in the future, this is even less and less the ideal world. In an ideal world, we would have projects where this is possible from the start. You don't have to apply for extra grants. You don't have to worry about having venues that are adequate. We're not there yet, but at least that's a bit the direction to take. And that's what the practice also should showcase, is like, okay, it should become a habit to think like that from the start. Not to blame the organizations who do not do that yet, but there is a scope for improvement there. And so, Rina, how can you realize that an inclusion project is successful? I don't know. I think that depends very much on, first of all, what's the posture, what's the starting point you are developing your project from. So what's calling for an inclusion project in the first place? Are you doing your project, and we heard that also in the other webinars, in the other ID talks, because you are responding to a need in the field or in the community? If you are responding to a need that comes from the community, there are a lot of chances that, first of all, that's going to be a success indicators, because you're doing something for a field and not just because the organization wants to this or that. You are really putting in that equation the needs of a local reality and what the organization can offer. Then I suppose that it really depends on what you want to achieve during the projects. Whom do you want to get in? What do you want to get out? So to have this very clear, in terms of outcomes or in terms of outputs, to give yourself the means to achieve those objectives in terms of expertise, having the proper people involved in terms of participants, but also in terms of team and support people, youth leaders, experts, depending on the type of project you want to have. In principle, all these are already factors that can induce a certain form of success, but this is just one answer, and there could be many, many, many more. I would always say that if at the end of a project, people come back to you after a few months and saying, wow, this was really an experience I will not forget. This changed this and that and that and that, or it opened my eyes. I had no idea about this and that and that and that. Usually what changes someone, I think, is a really good indicator of a successful project. We can prepare things as best as we can. We can never be fully sure about the transformative potential it has. So that comes afterwards when people come back to you. And as I said, it might be just at the end of the project, but it can be some months later or even years later where they say, you know what, that very project, I didn't get it at that time, but it did have that impact or that impact or that impact. I don't know if this is the answer you wanted to hear, Sorina. It's not very scientific as an answer, but that's my opinion at least. Yeah. Thank you to both for your questions.
Thank you, Gisele. I think this is a very good moment maybe to pass the floor to Olaja. By this time, normally everybody forgets that she's tirelessly working in the background to prepare the graphic notes from the talk. So Olaja, you have the chance now to showcase what are the initial results of your recording today.
Thank you, and I hope you can hear me. I'm sharing now these snapshots. Thank you, Gisele. I was myself involved in the visualization of this initial research. So again, like very strong points and very interesting to see them even more summarized because it was such an amount of information and quite complex. So yeah, I don't think I can say anything else that Gisele didn't transform already or passed on today. But yeah, and I think it's very good news that the overall result is that there has been a lot of progress made and that we acknowledge and we understand what are the points that still need to be improved, because then that means we have a next step and the clear path to follow and then to continue building, let's say. So as usual, this is the first snapshot. I will rework it, and then you will have the finalized visual approximately next week in your emails. Thank you.
Well, we are coming to the end, to the close of today's ID talk. First, I would like to give the floor back to Gisele, if you would like to say some closing words about your contribution today, maybe something you forgot to mention, or maybe some closing remarks, and then Maria will close the session and the season of ID Talks Fall 2024.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Olaya. It's as always, your work is just absolutely mind-blowing. So thanks a lot for that. I don't want to conclude on the research as such. Research is important. I think it was actually, yes, two things. First of all, it was important because it was necessary to take the time to look a little bit more about what's going on in the programs. But as a person involved, it was so inspiring to hear the experiences of the people. In the end of the day, it's not so much what's on paper, and I cannot pass on the feelings I had, but talking with people like you, Anna, or like other colleagues or participants or national agencies, we had hours of exchanges literally on these topics. So to talk with passionate people about a topic that should in principle not even be a topic anymore. We should not be still talking about inclusion and diversity, and yet we are. So it's so inspiring to hear about people's experience, and also listening to the other ID talks. So thank you for that. And really, in general, it keeps on raising the right questions, but it also helps me to to question myself and my work on a regular basis. So questions like what Torina or what Soazik, I'm so sorry if I don't pronounce your name well, pardon vous. But these are questions I think that are helpful. So I'm grateful, and very often, as I mentioned, in a way, I question what else do we need to say about inclusion and diversity that we haven't said yet, and what else do we need to do that we haven't done yet. But obviously, if you look at the world, I think we still have a lot to do. So let's do it.
Thank you very much. And Maria, now your 2 minutes of end of the season fame.
Thank you, Anna. And yeah, Gisele, we will do it. We will continue the ID talks, but let's first close this season. In the meantime, I was actually trying to count which season is this, because I think, Anna, we as a team lost the track because we started.
I was counting this morning.
I think 9.
End of season 9,
yes.
Which means 45 talks so far.
Yeah.
Mind-blowing, I think.
Yes, we started with 5 in 2020, and 4 years later, we are here with you. Thank you. We wouldn't be doing it for 4 years if you wouldn't be disengaged and coming back with questions and ideas. And so with this season, we took you on a trip through Europe, looking at the European projects and their inclusivity, and how we can all learn from this and make our international projects more inclusive. But from February 2025, we are going to travel and to take the small local roads. And Gisele mentioned actually Europe Goes Local as an initiative at the beginning of this talk, and that's where with what we will start the next year. So there will be 5 talks in spring next year, taking you to different municipalities across Europe and beyond. We will go to big metropolitan cities and to small rural places to see how the municipalities there are actually working and developing like a local youth strategies, what kind of youth policies they have in place there, who are the people and organizations and stakeholders involved in those processes, and how all that is making the communities more inclusive and just more cohesive. So that's for the next year. I just want to thank you all for this season, and I think, Anna, officially you close the session and you close 2024 ID talks.
We hope that this year will stay in your mind with some positive, good memories of inclusive and diversity sensitive youth work practices, and that next year will bring more opportunities and more results. So Happy New Year, I would say, because for us, it is end of the year today. So bye, and we hope to see you back next season of ID Talks. And Gisele, thank you so much for being with us today.